E aí, Otávio? Tamo aí, né, mano? Bora fazer. Vamos dar uma olhadinha aí nessas classes. Vou tirar isso aqui. Já vou deixar arrumado aqui o navegador. Aqui, ó, já pegou. Hum. Bom, vou esperar eles começar pra arrumar essa janela. Caralho, velho. Toda hora dá algum problema. Agora a tela. O minha telinha aqui que mostra eventos recentes não tá funcionando. Cara, toda hora o OBS dá algum problema, mano. Impressionante. A impressão que dá é que todo mundo tá mais interessado no Antiquary do que todos os outros dois juntos. Tipo, tá todo mundo. Ah, o. O meu Necro tá safe. O Necro tá safe, eu nem preciso ver. Ai, ai. Quando vê, o Tiff vai ser o mais legal. O Paragon. O Paragon vai salvar no grito, literalmente. Ai, ai. Paragon vai salvar no grito. Ai, nossa. Vamos botar aqui, eu vou deixar rodando a última apresentação só pra ter o que fazer enquanto isso. E aí, Baidu? Cara, eu acho que o Paragon ele vai ser uma classe full suportezão, assim. Tipo, eu acho que vai ser útil. E eu não sei se vai ser divertido, tá ligado? Mas eu acho que ela vai ser bem útil. Bem usada em Word vs Word e em conteúdo mais difíceis. Agora, em conteúdo mundo aberto, difícil. Que isso, Otávio? Caralho, que ranço de Tiff, mano. Caralho, quanto ódio no coração. Jesus. É. É, Tiff é uma classe chata mesmo. Ixi, é chata, mas ao mesmo tempo é um pastel, um papelzão, né? Tipo, se tu pega, tu mata. Ai, ai. Cara, eu não sei o que estavam esperando do Paragon. Tipo assim, ó. É, o pessoal eu já tinha ouvido falar que ele era a classe de suporte que gritava. É exatamente isso que eles estão estão integrando aqui, tipo. Pô. É uma classe de suporte que berra. Era o que tinha antes no Guild Wars 1. Aí vamos ver o. Sei lá, o Necromancer parece que tá ok, né? Vamos ver. Cara, assim, ó, o Thief. E aí, Batosai. O Thief ainda tem esperança de ser interessante, tá ligado? O Paragon eu não tenho. Paragon eu não acho que vai ser uma classe que eu vou jogar. Já começou. Aonde que já começou? Ainda não começou, não. Não, não. É que tem que ter. Enfim. Não, não começou ainda, Lucas. Às 16. Eu tô acostumado com um ponto de interrogação no final pra deduzir que é uma pergunta, desculpa. Deixa ele quieto, Rick. Só não deleta. Certeza que uma hora tu vai querer jogar com ele. Só não deleta. Ai, Three Lives. Por que agora a porra do Streamlabs não tá funcionando? Sim, tô ligado, Lucas. Ai, multistream. Deixa eu testar aqui, ver se tá funcionando. Pelo menos os eventos. Acho que tá. Isso aí, nem sei o que que é isso aí. YouTube, membership. Mas isso não é a minha. Não é a minha animação de membership. O meu teclado também é espanhol, mano. É uma merda. Esse teclado aqui me dá ranço. Eu tive que pegar umas teclas, porque tá todo trocado. Tem umas teclas que estão trocadas. Eu tive que usar uma caneta pra anotar quais são as teclas pra decorar. Caralho, sério isso? Caralho, que merda, mano. Nossa, cliquei num botão aqui. Nossa. Peraí, deixa eu tirar isso aqui. Botei sem querer. Vai ter Kempa, vai ter daqui a pouquinho, vai começar. Não, não é nem roubado, mano. É como se ele fosse tipo. Como se fosse uma coisa que ele encontrou, tá ligado? Mas vai ser no F1, com certeza. Recente eventos. Saco, mano. Só imagino. Não tá rolando drops, Otávio. Infelizmente. Eu tô com a esperança que eles ativem drops no beta, na semana do beta. Eu tô com a esperança que eles ativem beta, mano. Pera aí que eu vou pedir pra eles adiantar pra ti, Igor. Aí, assistir agora. Eu vou aumentar a tela aqui quando eles começarem. Offline, tava aparecendo online. Ah, tá. Aqui tá off, aqui tá online, sei lá o que tá acontecendo. Vamos esperar, né? Às 16 horas, não tem jeito. Cara, pior que. Acho que semana que vem vai ser a semana mais interessante. Tipo, o Elementalista eu tô empolgado que vai ser tipo Invoker. Vamos ver. O Revenant e o Engenheiro eu não tenho nem ideia. Então, tipo, tá. O legal é que a gente realmente não faz nem ideia. O Revenant vai invocar alguma lenda, né? A gente já sabe. Eu acho que é a Lady Gaga. Mas eu não sei o que vocês estão achando. E não vai fugir muito disso, né? Sempre é uma lenda. O Elementalista a gente não sabe como é que vai funcionar esse negócio de invocação dos elementos e tal. Mostraram só raposinha, mas pode ser que sejam vários tipos de elementos diferentes. Vai ser sim, vai ser igualzinho Batosai, com certeza. Sonha um pouquinho mais alto. Sonha um pouquinho mais. Cara, sei lá, Baidu, eles estão tão preguiçosos que é capaz do Elementalista evocar só a raposa e mudar de cor. Eu não duvido, eu não duvido nada. Uma lenda feral. Não, eu não acho. Eu acho que a gente tem muita. Cara, essas specs estão muito com vibe de. Muito com vibe de música, de arte. Acho que vai ser alguma coisa relacionada a isso. Lenda do demônio da sogra. Ai, ai, eu tô falando que a lenda vai ser a Lady Gaga e vocês estão brincando, mano. Vocês estão, olha. Vai ser duas lendas ainda, hein? Ele vai summonar a Lady Gaga, que vai ser mais dano, power, e o Michael Jackson, que vai ser dano condition. Vocês vão ver. Eles vão surpreender com o Revenant. Cara, agora lembrando daquele ícone, daí faria mais sentido o negócio do feral, mano. Do feral, tipo, se algum tipo uma fera. Poderia ser. Pô, seria legal se a gente pudesse invocar realmente meio que dragões mesmo, tipo, invocar o poder dos dragões, em vez de ser só lenda. Eles podiam sair um pouquinho da caixinha, né? Mas eu não espero mais nada da ArenaNet. Não espero mais nada. Já volto. É, mano, a primeira coisa que eu pensei que fosse um punho, mas depois, quanto mais eu ficava olhando aquela imagem, mais eu vinha outras coisas, tipo, ia ser várias coisas aquela imagem. Sabe a única coisa que eu recomendo vocês fazer? Não viajar. Porque depois das cartinhas do Tiff, não sonhem muito alto. Tiff, do Tiff, do Wire e do Necromance. Nossa senhora, tá muito bugado isso aqui, mano. A Elementalista vai ficar por último, mano. Não tem jeito. Ah, pode ser. Eu achei que a minha página do Streamlabs estivesse bugada, mas talvez ele só resetou. Quando alguém se inscrever, eu descubro. Ah, mano, eu. Iniciou. Deixa eu clicar aqui de novo. Aqui não tá rolando nada, mano. E aí, Stark? Dá um refresh na página. Aí, agora foi.
Pretty excited, right, Taylor?
Yep. Excited to, show off some specs that, people have been waiting for a while, and, a new one that, it's a surprise to many people. The
Tá bom o som?
Antiquary is pretty interesting spec we're excited to show people with some elements that haven't really put into any elite specialization before. And we'll get into that in a second, but pretty excited to show people what we've created.
Yeah, and as always, keep in mind we're building up toward the beta. There's going to be a lot of things that aren't quite finished yet. We're still doing some final polish, doing some final balance tuning, even tweaking a few traits here and there. So on this stream you'll see some temporary text. A lot of things that might not look as optimal as they will once we get down the road to launch, but the idea is that we're getting these to a point where they are very much playable and in a place where we feel pretty good about a lot of the mechanics. I'm not saying that everything's going to be perfect, but we're going to try out some crazy stuff. Some of it's not going to work. We're going to go back after the beta between then and launch and make some additional updates as needed. So just keep that in mind as you're watching this today, as you're playing through the beta. We're definitely looking for that feedback from all of you to see like what is working, what isn't working, like what needs to be improved, and we'll definitely see some changes between beta and launch. But anything else you want to mention, Taylor, before we hop right in?
No, I think covered it.
All right. I hope everyone is hydrating and ready. I will be talking more today, so ready to go. We'll be kicking things off with the Antiquary today.
Ó, deixaram melhor pro começo.
So, as mentioned, anyone who read the blog, we kind of have a vague understanding of the spec. So, as always, we're going to go over all the new progression stuff, all the new utility skills, all the new traits. Don't even have the correct elite skill equipped here. But the first things first, the Antiquary is kind of this like a collector of various artifacts from across Tyria. So we're going to
Puta merda.
We use Grit Snatch. This is the new replacement for Steel. This is just going to be a ranged, kind of similar to Deadeye in that sense, where it's not going to be a forced teleport in, but you're going to have a ranged button that gives you your stolen bundles that will, in this case, be drawn from a random collection of these artifacts. And the idea is that every time that you crit snatch, the baseline is you're just going to have 2 of these. You see, this might be teasing towards something where the F4 button appears. We'll get to that once we get into the traits. Where we're going to get access to a couple of different artifacts. There's a pool of 8 different artifacts that we can draw from. 4 of them are more offensively focused, 4 of them are more defensively focused.
Pô, são 8 habilidades novas só
The
aí.
idea is that, you know, every time that you crit snatch, you will get a couple of these, or maybe even a few of these, depending on your trait selections. And that is going to kind of you know, play into your decision making as you adapt to the situation at hand as you draw these. And obviously, there is an element of randomness to this. We're gonna, once we get into the traits, we're gonna see the adept tier is entirely dedicated to ways to mitigate that randomness, because, you know, we know as designers, as we're putting this together, that there's always a fine line to walk when we're making something that has a little bit more inherent randomness than you know, other things that just don't have any. And we want to make sure that there's opportunities for this randomness to exist and kind of that fun, you know, moment-to-moment decision-making to happen without having like too many low-roll situations that feel really bad, or like really high-roll situations that blow out, so that, you know, when you're trying to do your
Não
DPS
peguei isso
benchmark
aí.
and you get your
Então,
1%
bom
high
dia,
roll,
boa
that is your
tarde,
like
Led.
80k DPS or something, you know, that's not really what we're going for. You know, there will be some things that are slightly more powerful than others, because that is going to just play into, you know, there's going to be some skills that are just raw damage and some that have a little bit more utility baked in. Or we'll see, like, as we get into the traits, there's some mitigation there, and then we're also going to be keeping a very close eye on this as we get into the beta and, you know, all the feedback around this, seeing like how much of the randomness works, how much, you know, maybe we need to have a little bit more mitigation in their baseline. We'll see how it goes, but the idea is that we have kind of a wider collection of really powerful stolen bundles, and every time that you steal, you're going to get a couple of these or a few of these. So we're
Cara, eu
going to
só
run through
entendi
all
que
of
um é
these. I'm
defensivo
going
e
to
outro é
use some developer
ofensivo,
cheats
nos F.
so that the stream doesn't take a while to go through all of them, because you never know what you're going to grab, but I'm just going to give myself some. I guess it's worth mentioning, every time that you steal, you can use one of these 2 bundles by default. Obviously, if you have improvisation, that's going to let you use another one, and there might even be a trait that allows you to use a 3rd stolen skill every time that you pilfer or crit snatch. So we're going to kick things off with all of the offensive bundles. Starting off with the Metal Legion guitar. This one's a bit more of a kind of like a hybrid damage
O
and a
favorito
little
de
bit of
todos.
CC in there as well. So we're going to walk over here to some of our enemy golems, play the guitar. That's going to do some pulsing damage, apply some confusion, and then we're going to slam the guitar down, do a little bit of extra damage, and a nice little stun there.
Pô, a animação tá legalzinha.
So, you know, we're going to see like some condition damage elements on some of these skills as well. So there's going to be a mix of, you know, power damage and condition damage, and you obviously see some
Power,
CCs here
condition,
as well.
CC.
So this skill will probably do a little bit less damage than some of the pure DPS skills that we see a little bit later. You can play this a few times. I'm cheating, so you know I can just use this skill as many times as I want, and there's nothing that these golems can do about it.
Eu acho que era condition aí, não é?
As we kind
Não,
of showed off
CC,
earlier,
CC.
you will only get to use these a single time.
You can move with the guitar, you know, just in case it's not
Oh yeah, you want to
entirely
rock
clear.
out.
So you're not rooted that entire time.
You know, I'm
Can
gonna
follow people.
run down the stage and slam my guitar or something
Ah, eu
like that.
gostei da animação da guitarra. Achei legal.
Next up, we're going to take a look at the Forged Surfer Dash. This one's going to be a ground-targeted dash. Still a little bit more offensively focused. We'll see a couple of mobility
Era
skills on the
curto, mano,
defensive
não
end as
vi
well.
quanto.
But this one is just going to be a mobility skill that drops some exploding bombs on the ground. So we can see this here,
Ah, que
dashing
legal.
through all these golems, dropping a bunch of AoEs on the ground. That's going to do some pretty relevant damage and burning. So a nice little mobility skill. You can obviously use this to run away as well. And enemies
gostei ali, a
chasing you might
movimentação.
run over all your bombs or force dodges or whatever have you. But a nice little combo of mobility and damage on this one. Get a close up.
É, a ideia é a mesma, Otávio.
Pretty cool.
Mas a animação é diferente, pelo menos.
Riding the Forged Surfer stuff.
Mas a ideia é a mesma.
Surfing across the stage, if you will. Next up, we're going to take a look at the Cryptus turret. So this one is just going to be a ground targeted place this on the ground somewhere. Here's your little script assistant is hanging off of that. I don't know if that happens all the time. I've seen it sometimes where it doesn't, so that's a nice little
Porra.
bonus that you might notice sometimes.
Tá, essa torrezinha
A
achei
lot of the
meio...
effects have little script in them for you to see.
Sometimes your little script assistant will appear, but this is a pretty straightforward. Summon the turret. This is going to be like the main bread and butter damage skill. Only does damage.
Ah,
but it's
pensei
gonna
que a
shoot
torre ia
at the nearest
ficar.
enemy
Que decepção.
and do some pretty nice damage.
Nossa, essa aí é muito
You can
fraca.
place at range. Not your friends, it won't attack them, but you can try your best, I guess.
Tá, a torre ficou ruim. As
Next
outras
up, we
duas eu
have
gostei.
the Mistburn Mortar. This is another one of the pretty aggressive damage skills. This one is going to fire off and create an area that is pulsing some burning. I think I might actually have a trait on right now. No, I don't have a trait on right now. This is going to be a nice little ranged pulsing field. Does some burning, does some damage. Nice little well of whatever you want to call it. But this is again, going to be one of the more powerful
consegui ver o
offensive
range
skills
dela.
because it is just a raw damaging ability.
Alguém conseguiu ver o range dela?
Next, we'll start to take a look at some of the defensive artifacts. Starting with the Exalted Hammer. So this one's going to be an evade. Also,
Cura. 4.500 de
600
cura.
range leap, so we can leap over here. The idea is that it is going to do some damage. This is something that even the defensive artifacts are going to have a little bit of damage attached to them because, again, we want to kind of mitigate some of the low rolly aspects where if you are in a situation where you want to use a defensive artifact, you can still use it and get some amount of damage. It's obviously not going to be as much damage as any of the offensive artifacts, but you will still get that defensive capability, get that evade, get some healing, and still do a little bit of damage if you're landing on an enemy. But a nice little defensive skill with a nice little heal attached to that. And slam the ground with the Exalted Hammer.
Cara, que mistureba de status, né?
Next up, we're going to see the Chalk Shield. So this one is more of a projectile destruction type of defensive skills. We're going to drop it down. We see our little Scrit assistant helping us out here, creating the barrier.
Não vi o que
That's
que
gonna
faz,
destroy
mano.
projectiles. This is also going to pulse some damage to enemies in the area. It's also a light field if you find some use for that.
Ah,
you know,
block
combo
missiles.
through it,
Ah, legal.
if you really want to, but the big thing here is that this is going to be that powerful projectile destruction defensive skill.
Visualmente tá ok, Igor. Tipo, tá legalzinho assim, olha. Olha, é um script. Essa classe tá uma bagunça, mas tá legal, tipo,
Artifacts
por
to look
enquanto.
at before we move on, but next up we have the Zephyrite Sun Crystal. This one's going to be a stun break, also another one of those ground targeted dashes, and does have a little bit of a burning
Cara,
attached to it at the
eles
end
podiam
here,
chamar essa classe de Batman.
but you can always use
O cara
the
tem de
getaway
tudo. É,
or
exatamente.
dash in.
Ele
You're
tem
gonna be
tipo
having
um
that,
cinto de
long
utilidade que ele
duration
tira qualquer coisa.
evade if you're going kind of the max distance, and then we're also going to have that nice little burning explosion at the end. So again, stun break as well, and then long distance dash with evasion. Pretty powerful defensive skill. And last but not least, we have the Hollow Dancer Decoy. This one's going to be more of a crowd control-y type of effect. It does do some damage and crowd control, but it is kind of tied in with the defensive artifacts we see here. We summon the Scrit Hollow Dancer. The enemies are all distracted and taunted, and then it explodes, doing some damage. So, pretty long taunt, 3 seconds baseline here. And that can obviously set up some of your offensive skills if you are playing like the improv build, or obviously your own weapon skills, or some of the double-edged skills that we will get to very shortly. Anything you wanted to add on the artifacts, Taylor, before we move on?
I just want to know, would the Scrit Hollow Dancer work on you, Cal?
I'm not sure it would, but it probably would because it'll just taunt me. And
Cara, não
everyone knows that
sei.
taunt is my favorite
Essa aqui é
condition
uma que o
in
cara vai
Duelist
ter
2.
que jogar pra ver se vai ficar legal ou não.
Kind of unavoidable, There's something alluring about it, right?
Tipo, pelo que eu entendi, a gente só vai poder escolher sempre ou F2 ou F3.
Anyway, let's go ahead and move on to double-edged skills, and then we'll get into the traits.
Mas tem as traits também.
So, we talked about this mechanic a little bit in the blog as well, where the double-edged skills are essentially... The best way to describe them is kind of like a flip skill, where there is two parts. There's the baseline that you'll always use initially, and then there is the secondary component, which is called the backfire. And the way that this mechanic works is, after I use the skill, it's going to do, what it does. And then as it's recharging, you have the opportunity to use the skill again. And the idea is that, in this, right there, I didn't get the backfire, so I was able to use the base skill again with essentially no downside, or on a shorter recharge than is typically intended. And that's going to be based off how much of the skill recharge is left. So if there's 50% of this recharge remaining, then I have a 50% chance to backfire. And in this case, I did get the backfire, and then it goes on full recharge. You can't continue to activate it as soon as the skill has backfired. So a lot of these are more of a risk-reward that we'll see on some of the utilities. But for the heal, we kept it pretty straightforward. It is more of just an all upside where, you can just use this button. You'll probably just press this button back to back because you want to get that big heal, get that big cleanse. But there's going to be a lot more decision making as we get into some of the rest of these skills here. This is just a good example of like how the mechanic works, and there's really no downside to backfiring, but we are able to, have that, I guess, extra decision point, because there will be times where you just want like this sustained heal, and maybe you press it with like 3 seconds left because you think, okay, well, now I get
novo isso aqui, né? Tu
a
poder
pretty
usar
low
a
chance of
habilidade
getting that
enquanto ela
failure
tá em
state. I
cooldown.
can just use my heal a little bit more often than I typically can. And then sometimes you are going to want that double tap, more likely to backfire. I didn't even backfire there with a 70% chance. Quite lucky. Wow, I'm just on a roll today with my... So, we will see some of that as we get into the utility skills as well. There's going to be a lot more powerful downsides, I guess you would say, or a large opportunity cost of some of these backfire skills. But the idea is that
Eu não sei se na prática, no PVP, no adversário, isso vai funcionar.
And it gives you a baseline effect, and then you can just ignore the mechanic if you want to and never risk backfiring. But there is always going to be like, you can save a couple seconds off your cooldown and have a pretty low % chance for something to go wrong. Maybe you want to roll the dice. So again, anti-venom drop, pretty straightforward. Small heal and Conti removal on a low cooldown, or you can go for that backfire, get a big heal, big Conti removal, and it will go on a longer cooldown when that happens. Next up, we'll take a look at the Stone Summit Cannon. So this is going to conjure another Scrit Helper to kind of fire this cannon. We're going to see it does a pretty big AoE burning, AoE damage. Oh, and I got the backfire there right away. I'm just going to show this skill off a few times without risking the backfire. We do see just a pretty strong DPS skill here. Big damage, big burning, long range. Well, 900 range, more of that mid-rangey type range. But then we did see the backfire there. Let's just show it off. Real time. The idea is that the cannon itself kind of does a backfire. So the Scrit's like, what's going on? And then it explodes and it does a bunch of damage. Notably, this will deal damage to yourself as well, but it is pretty easy to walk out of, as we saw. So we're just going to fire that off. I'm going to walk out of it. These golems are going to stand there, and they're going to get hit by an even stronger burst of burning and a bit of damage as well. So, this sets up really well with CC skills, or other players CCing for you, or bosses that typically don't move very much. Pretty low risk, because it is, once again, there I got a pretty rapid succession of multiple uses of the base skill into that backfire. It's very easy for you to walk out of it. So this one again is pretty low risk, and if you are looking for that burst of damage, it might be something that you want to press back to back.
Can I get you to do a close-up on the Scrit during the backfire?
Oh, yeah.
Just make sure that everyone sees what's going on there.
Getting incredibly lucky again. Showing up one more time.
Eu não lembro o nome das... A Rare é de 200?
And then...
if you were playing this spec with the goal to do the most damage, what would your number be, Cal? What percent chance would be
Não,
risking to do the
eu tô
backfire?
confundindo.
Because I
Fine
think, you
é.
know, normally taking like a 10% chance with like a second left on the cooldown seems pretty good.
Tá
Get a
falando
lot
das
of value
essências aquelas
sustained,
de
Well, I mean,
sopro?
this skill doesn't go on a longer cooldown, so
Pra
I'm just
fazer
double tapping
obsidian?
this all the time.
right.
Because, you know, I can press W and I can walk out of this. That's no problem. Or maybe the boss is gonna CC me and it's all gonna go wrong.
Eu acho que no
Next up,
PvE
you'll take a
aleatório.
look at the Inquest portal device. So this one's going to be a bit more mobility as well.
Tá bom, mano. Dá pra fazer alguma coisa.
Does a little bit of damage, a little bit of vulnerability, kind of like that setup, you know, dash in, kind of that kind of infiltration type skill. And then the backfire.
Precisa de 3.000 da vermelha, que é a mais a menor, pra poder fazer set completo.
I didn't because I waited a long time playing it safe. But here we go again.
É a única que eu lembro de cor.
So this is more of a break in case of emergency type skill where if you are, you know, porting away from somebody and then you need to port away again, you're obviously gonna get knocked down, maybe combo with a stun break or you have stability. You know, there's definitely options with this skill, but a lot of the time you will probably just use the front half of the skill and then the backside will be purely for emergencies. Or, you know, maybe you can get really lucky and shadow step multiple times.
É como o Wild falou, mano, tu tem pra fazer conjunto.
You gotta be ready for the backfire because life comes at you fast. You know, porting in but getting knocked down, that seems maybe not the best thing to happen to you. So
it's definitely a high risk, but again, a very powerful effect being able to, you know, shadow step multiple times off one skill. Yeah. So we'll see that again as we get into, well, the next skill here, Emergency Jade Shield. This is going to be a stun break, and notably, the backfire side of this is also a stun break. So the base of this skill is we're just going to get a little bit of barrier. We're going to do a stun break, so a nice little defensive skill here. And the backfire is that you will have the shield kind of explode, so you will take a lot of damage. I can stop cheating all super heavily here, so we can just see a pretty notable amount of damage to yourself. You obviously get a little bit of barrier on top of that, and you had barrier from the front half, so there is, you know, some built-in defense. And this will do, you know, a bit of damage as well. We are hitting this golem with this explosion in addition to ourselves, kind of the same idea that we saw with the Stone Summit Cannon. But this is, again, a very powerful defensive skill where you will have kind of a almost an ammo stun break
bem zoeira.
that, you know, recharges the entirety of it every time the recharge comes down. So there is a pretty significant trade-off here for the backfire with that damage to yourself. So something that you could potentially combo off the portal device as well. You know, maybe you port in, and then you realize you need to port again, and then you can even just use the front half of the Jade Shield to break out of that stun. And last up here we have the Canuck coin toss. So a fun little coin flip animation here. And the idea is that things are going to happen based off of whether you flip heads or tails, and there is obviously some baseline here. So we see the front half of this skill, this is going to be more of just a initiative and condition removal skill. And if you win that coin flip,
Agora saber qual live
each
caiu.
time you win that coin flip, you'll get a little bit of an extra initiative bump and a condition converted to a boon as opposed to just a single initiative and a condition removal. But, you know, for all the statisticians in chat, you guys can do the expected value of a coin flip pretty easily. So you can see that, you know, maybe you end up with 1.5 initiative every time you flip a coin, so 4.5 initiative every time you use that skill. And, you know, you'll convert 1.5 conditions to boons every time you press the button. But this is just more of that, you know, again, condition removal, initiative lets you do a lot of things. You know, if you flip 3 heads, maybe it should even give you an additional bonus initiative because you got that 1 in 8. But currently it doesn't. That's just a fun aside. But you will still get 6 initiative back.
Normal.
Converting 3 conditions to boons on a pretty low cooldown. So a nice little
difícil mínimo que vale alguma coisa.
Then obviously you can reactivate this again. If you do backfire, we see the red coins here to indicate that something terrible has happened. This is going to be another example of like more of a break in case of emergency, because there's going to be a pretty significant downside here where when you reuse the skill, you will always be removing boons from yourself. And when you lose the coin flip, you will even convert those boons into conditions, but it will be that more of that emergency, more
Como é que
initiative
tu
button.
vai...
And
Cara, como é
this
que
one,
tu vai
the
equilibrar
risk
essa
reward
classe,
probably
mano?
quite isn't there yet. We want to maybe crank up the initiative on the backfire side so that you are, getting something for that, removing boons from yourself. Obviously, not something you want to do very often, but we do want to find the right balance for these backfires where they are actually decision points where you choose whether or not you actually want to use this secondary component of the skill. And last up, we have the elite skill here, the Scrit Scuffle. I'm going to take a quick water break as people read very quickly. But the idea here is that we're going to create an area where the scrits they're just going wild, digging up everything, and we're going to see here that every interval, every 3 seconds, we're getting essentially a new set of artifacts. Sometime we're going to get this unstable script bomb, and this one is kind of a this is something that you can use to set up yourself or your allies. You can stun break out of this, kind of like that headbutt type of self CC and enemy CC. It's supposed to be more of like a downside as opposed to just getting like the artifacts that you want. So it's intended to be a little bit less common that you'll actually use that skill, but there are going to be situations where that is a pretty powerful CC effect. But as we see here, we're continuously getting new artifacts for the duration of this.
Dá pra ficar spamando os artefatos, será?
And we can be firing them off, getting new artifacts.
Dá.
That's going to be pretty useful as we get into some of the traits that care about using artifacts. Don't want to dash out of the radius because that will prevent you from getting the
Interessante esse combo aí.
Just a pretty powerful skill. You essentially get to steal 5 times is the elite skill here. Yeah, so let's just get right into the traits because there's a lot of things that care about artifacts and there's a lot of things that, we have some of that RNG mitigation as well. I'm going to put on improvisation because that is my favorite way to play with the Antiquary at the moment. Because again, that does give you the extra artifact uses, and we'll see even more artifact uses as we get into some of these adept traits. But starting things off, here's a Trinket Collector, explains the specialization. You can kind of scroll through all the different artifacts here. We'll come back to all of those later for all of the screenshotters. Some people may have noticed the Magpie's Defense triggering as we were kind of showing stuff off. This is going to say when you use your healing skill or elite skill, you're going to get some personal barrier. These are separate cooldowns, so I use my heal skill, I get some barrier, and I'm going to then immediately use my elite skill, get some additional barrier. So nice little self-survivability.
Não sei, mano. Eu não vou pegar reembolso que eu quero meu gay shot.
Right away, the enterprising aristocrat.
Gay shot, né? Como é que é o nome?
Every time you use an artifact skill, you're going to get some initiative back. So here, immediately we see like a big value with the elite skill. You're going to potentially get back 10 initiative every time you use your elite, and there's even more opportunity to get even more stolen skills. We'll get to that very quickly.
Tiro de gala.
Starting off with the kind of RNG mitigation, some people probably noticed here we got the reshuffle here when we selected the card swap adept trait. The idea is that every time you reshuffle your artifacts, which is now a skill that you have, you can spend 2 initiative every 5 seconds.
Pior que o Scepter do Revenant não existe, mano. Desculpa, mas daí tu exagerou.
This won't redraw empty slots, so I have improvisation equipped, which means I can use both of these. So if I do use the first artifact here, my improvisation not work as intended. You break something.
Aí a cartinha, mano, é o F4 a cartinha.
Nope. Okay, it worked this time.
Pode trocar os negócios ali.
We now see when I reshuffle, I only get to redraw a single artifact because that is the only artifact that I had remaining. And this is also going to give you a little bit condition removal. So just a powerful defensive trait as well. Every 5 seconds, you can spend 2 initiative and remove a condition from yourself. Next up, we have the split deck.
Esse é péssimo sinal, eu concordo.
This guarantees that you'll get an offensive artifact and a defensive artifact every time you steal. This is something that we're really considering. This one should maybe even be baseline to the spec, but we want to see how it plays in the beta first, because this is going to be like a big reduction in those cases where you really need a defensive artifact and you just draw 2 offensive ones, and that feels pretty bad. And similarly, when you're just looking to maximize your damage and you draw 2 defensive artifacts, this is going to prevent you from doing that. Maybe that should just be how the mechanic works in the first place, but we're going to see like how it plays in the beta, because there is like a couple more. The bottom trait here is even more powerful, so maybe it needs to have that extra layer of randomness on top
Nem
of
tu
the
vai saber, né,
prolific plunderer,
Guardião?
but
Nem o próprio
again,
Tiff.
play with it during the beta. Let us know what you think. We're definitely thinking about that type of thing already, where maybe you should always draw an offensive and defensive, and there could be some alternative RNG mitigation on this trait. Next up, we have Prolific Plunderer. This gives you an additional artifact slot, and you can then use an additional artifact every time you pilfer. So now I have Improvisation and I have Prolific Plunderer, which means every time that I get 3 artifacts, I can use all 3 of them. Potentially very powerful, because again, we have Enterprising Aristocrat. Every time I'm using an artifact, I'm getting initiative back. This is definitely, my favorite way to play, because you just get to use all the fun toys and you get a bunch of initiative back, which means you get to use all your weapon skills a bunch. It's pretty fun. What do you think, Taylor?
Yeah, I think I also prefer just like max randomness here. As many slots you don't really get, but you gotta operate on the fly. Just take a quick look what you stole and then use them in combat. Have to really be on your feet when you play this spec, especially with this trait. So I think it makes the spec a lot more interesting when you take it.
And of course, that does make it more likely that you always draw an offensive or defensive, but it will not guarantee that, as Split Deck does. Moving into the master tier, we're going to start with Scoundrel's Luck. So this is this plays into the backfire mechanic. The idea is that every time that you use Scrit Snatch, the next time you use a double-edged skill that is recharging, it will guarantee that you get the front half of that skill again. It will not trigger the backfire. So that is potentially very strong with, one of the skills that we showed off with those more detrimental downsides with like the Emergency Jade Shield or the Inquest Portal device. That means I can, use my Scrit Snatch. It's difficult. I just say steal all the time and it's confusing. But then we can, port in, and then we can immediately port again, and that's going to guarantee that we're not going to get knocked down there. Then we can even port again and, probably get knocked down, but it does give you essentially 1 free use of a backfire to avoid a backfire every time that you steal, which is potentially very strong with, especially these 2 skills, but
O F4 é pra trocar o F2 e F3.
To use up your Scoundrel's Luck.
É literalmente, aí tá o sistema das cartas, tá ligado?
This is just going to improve all your artifacts. So again, this is a great trait with the improv build where you are getting 3 artifacts every time, able to use all 3 artifacts every time. We can kind of scroll through here. Metal Legion Guitar getting more damage, more confusion, additional stun duration. Forge Surfer Dash, we're going to see more damage, more burning. Misper Mortar, same thing, more damage, more burning. Just improvements to all of the artifacts here. The Chalk Shield, a little bit more duration, a bit more damage as well. Exalted Hammer, going to do some more damage, do some more healing. It looks like the healing number is incorrect on this specific instance, but it will be larger than the one that we saw on the initial skill in-game. And the Cryptus Turret obviously doing more damage. Hollow Dancer doing a bit more damage. The radius here is going to be larger, so even more likely to trap enemies inside. And the Zephyrite Sun Crystal going to do a little bit more burning at the end of that dash. So, the more that you're using artifacts, the more that you might find this trait valuable to make your artifacts better. Makes sense to me. And last up, we have Exhilarating Ephemera. This is just going to be more of that typical damage bonus trait. So every time you use an artifact, you're going to get some duration of this damage bonus. And we do
Pô,
see
tá bom, mano. O Guardian gostou, já tamo no lucro já. Alguém gostou.
Prolific Plunderer here or Improvisation, so that you're able to use multiple artifacts to stack up that buff and kind of get the max duration of this increased damage window. Take a quick break for water and mouse over this fun Grandmaster trait.
Pretty good icon for that one.
Olha que legal. Se vocês encontrarem Tiff desse no X1, vocês deixam ele quieto que ele se mata sozinho. O Dreves gostou, ó. Temos 2 já.
It won't trigger steel traits, but it will give you a set of artifacts.
Cara, eu acho que no PV vai ser legal essa Elite Spec, na boa. Não sei no PVP no Adversor, mas no PV vai ser legal.
I'm gonna get some we see some stacking buff. We obviously get lead attacks here at the same time, but this is stacking up, and once we get to the maximum stack count, that's going to give us a free pilfer. refilling our artifacts, and we're again playing the build with improvisation and prolific plunderer. So we get to use all 3 of these, and that's going to give me 6 initiative back. So there's a pretty fast-paced gameplay here where you are going to be able to be using a bunch of artifacts, giving you initiative back, using a bunch of initiative, getting more artifacts, and that's going to be kind of like an endless cycle of pilfering. It's pretty fun stuff. Next up, we have Possessive Hoarder. This one is going to be a bit more of a personal survivability trait. So every time that you use an artifact, you will grant barrier to yourself, and you're also going to get a boon depending on if you used an offensive artifact or a defensive artifact. So you can get stability or you can get resistance. Again, you know, using improv and prolific plunderer, this is going to mean that I can get a pretty good number of boons, get some stability, get some more stability. I got 3 defensive artifacts, so I'm going to get a lot of stability.
Yeah, this one's pretty good with a split deck trait, so you can always guarantee you have a trigger to give you resistance or stability, whatever you need when you steal.
And then last up, we have Combat High. This is intended to be more like a bursty, you know, thieves love to do burst damage, so here's the trait that's going to do a lot of burst damage. We're always going to get a bit more sustained damage from Prodigious Pincher, just getting that increased value over time. But Combat High is going to give you a big burst of damage that every time that you Crit Snatch, this is going to give you 10 stacks of this buff, Combat High, that says increased damage. So we see the baseline as you start at. This is a very large number. It's going to be obviously a little bit lower in competitive modes, but initially you will get that 30% damage buff, and then every couple of seconds that's going to start counting down toward 0, of course. But the idea is that you get that big burst, use a bunch of skills, immediately use all your artifacts, all your offensive
experiência
artifacts,
própria. Classe
into
que
that damage bonus, use
tem
some skills into the damage bonus, and
coisas
then that's gonna be
aleatórias
true every time that you
geralmente
steal, you're gonna be
tendem
able to
a
reset
ser menos
that
enjoativas.
super high damage burst.
Não sei se presta em PVP, Word vs Word, mas no PVE geralmente
Yeah, so that's all we have for the Antiquary. A lot
acaba
of really
sendo menos
fun stuff here,
enjoativo.
and a lot of really cool ideas. And you know, we talked a lot about the randomness and how we're keeping a very close eye on like how these things play, how much more mitigation do we need to make sure that the lows aren't too low, and making sure that, you know, we don't want the highs to be too high, because we don't want those situations where you do feel like not getting the highest high roll is actually a low roll. But we are trying to find the right balance of those things as we go into beta and of course beyond. So I'm just going to do some quick hovers for all the things, for all the screenshotters, while we wrap up. And Taylor, if you have any last things to talk about as I click through all of these artifacts.
Yeah, I saw, you know, some questions around the self-damaging parts of the backfires. Those only damage yourself, they do not hurt your allies. So, you know, if you do the mortar,
Mas o Blitzwire não
backfire,
tem
it'll only hurt
aleatoriedade, né,
you.
mano?
I know some people might be sad about that, but and some other questions. I think with regards to like roles of how this fits in places, and you know, boons and PvE especially, I think, you know, we have ideas correct around, you know, maybe this does need to be fit into an alacrity or quickness role. We're specifically interested in the beta to see kind of the core gameplay loops, specifically with like the RNG mechanics, how backfires play, as Cal mentioned, the adapt traits. So that's kind of like the focus around our feedback, but we're also keeping an eye on like, is there a way that makes sense to add, you know, some alacrity sharing or quickness sharing, whatever, what have you, with this spec, to give it some extra niches.
Sim.
We think, you know, the gameplay with the Grandmaster traits should be pretty interesting for just Pincher, as Cal went over. There's going to be like a lot of more sustained artifacts to hopefully give you pretty good damage over time with it. Keep that the master tier damage bonus up. But also talk about the combat high. It's kind of different from some other thief traits, and this is like specifically a really high burst trait. 30% is a really large number, as you guys are seeing, and the goal here is that we kind of augment how you play.
Eu acho que para Thief, eu acho que vai ser meu spec favorito.
Over time, if you do like quick math, but you should, you know, pool your resources and then use them in that burst window, which isn't always something we see thief specs wanting to do. So hopefully it gives it a bit of a different gameplay, in PvE especially.
O Wild gostou da o Guardia gostou da spec, Pipa. Isso já diz muita coisa.
All right. Yeah, for sure. And that is all of the things. So I'm going to go back here as we get set up for the Paragon.
Yeah, and I think another good
Paragon.
question
Eles
is
vão deixar o.
clarifying the backfire on the
Vão
elite.
deixar
The elite you
o
can't activate twice. The
Necrofruit.
backfire is specifically the script bomb part.
Falando
I
muito
believe you have
grito
a
agora.
20% chance to get that script bomb. And
Já
when you
volto.
have the Scoundrel's Luck master tier trait, that will cause it so that you have a 0% chance to get the script bomb. So you're only getting good stuff when you have those synergies going. Then next we'll head into the Paragon.
I think we are all set up here. All right, we have the Paragon. So I think Taylor's going to give me a break here and talk about this one. And I'll be back later to talk about the Ritualist.
Right. So the Paragon, obviously well-known profession from Guild Wars 1. Long asked for it again, like a lot of the ones we've been showing off. We're going to get to Ritualist later. Part of the lore is like, in our game, Palawa Joko kind of like crushed the Sun Spears and Paragons, but you know, spoiler alert, he's gone now. So Paragon as a profession has kind of come back up, kind of latched onto Warrior, and started, you know, inspiring their allies again. Talking about the gameplay loop, we're taking what was core to Paragon. It's a heavily supportive elite specialization, and then kind of merging it to Warrior, mixing with its mechanics, how would a Warrior support its allies and command the battlefield as a Paragon once did. So we can look at the UI, and you notice you have your burst skill there, and you also have 3 new buttons, and then a little outline of something that we'll get to. To start, it uses level 1 burst skills like Spellbreaker, because those other 3 buttons, their chance, they'll also be consuming adrenaline, so we wanted to make sure that management was a bit easier. The spec can be pretty adrenaline hungry. And so level 1 burst skills just made sense. But then we can start talking about the chance. That's really where the profession mechanics start, you know, happening, making sense. So we'll hover over Chant of Action. It's going to be your first one. This is going to be your more offensive chant, and it has a couple components here. Pretty big tooltip. The first thing that happens when you activate a chant is it's going to cost adrenaline, normal 10, like a normal burst skill. And for this one, have an initial effect. This one is that it's granting boons to your allies. And then after you activate it, a kind of passive effect called a refrain will start activating around you every interval. And so there's refrains. You see there's like 3 levels of him based on motivation. And motivation is a resource that you're going to gain when you use a burst skill. So the general gameplay flow is that you're going to turn on a chant, get a bit of motivation to start, then you're going to want to use burst skills or other chants to build your motivation even higher, so you get high levels of those refrains that are going to give pretty strong bonuses, depending on how much motivation you have. That's kind of the core of what this all says. We can move on to the second chant. That's going to be Chant of Recuperation. This one is a lot more supportive. It's going to be your healing one. So when you activate this one, you're going to give your allies a bit of barrier to kind of sustain them until the healing pulses can come through. And as you can see, you're going to pulse healing that's dependent on how much your motivation level is, as well as, you know, at the max, you're going to also be able to pulse resistance, pretty strong boon. This one, you can see the motivation cost is higher than the Chant of Action, so it's going to cost more and be harder to upkeep. So perhaps, you know, build up a lot of motivation when you're using your Chant of Action, and then you swap over to the Chant of Recuperation to get those really strong pulses, and so it doesn't completely drain you of the motivation as you use it. And then the last chant that we have is going to be the Chant of Freedom. This one is going to be your more utility kind of defensive shout that we have. When you first activate it, you're going to break stun from allies in an area, so it's a pretty powerful effect. And then it's also going to grant boons when you pulse based on your motivation. You can see that it starts, you know, pretty weak with swiftness, but then builds up Nexus Resolution, and then finally have a really strong stability effect. And you can see that instead of unlike the other two, this one's motivation cost is more scaling. The higher the motivation you have, the more it's going to cost. So trying to upkeep that stability is pretty hard, but keeping it at a low level 1 is going to be a lot easier. So those 3 kind of comprise what you want to be doing. You kind of always want to be having a chant active. You're getting bonuses as you swap between them from activating these chants, as well as just general burst skills in between.
Yeah, obviously, burst mastery
classe
is going to be a great
suporte,
trait
né? A
to
gente
take.
já esperava por
Just
isso.
give you that refund. You're going to be using so many bursts that refund is going to be even more noticeable, kind of similar to when we see it on
Guardião amarelo.
burst into full counter into burst, getting pretty good refunds there. And that's going to allow you to really set up that motivation. get up to
É
those
guardião
high
que
tiers
berra, é
to
isso.
stability or that resistance, those really key boons.
Yeah, I think the thing that you're gonna have to get used to when playing this spec is like extra energy management, keeping the motivation up, being able to track how much you have and how much you want to use, so you don't drain too much, so you're able to call on those high motivation chants when you want to. Then we can go into the utilities. The utilities are going to be command. You know, in Guild Wars 1, Paragons had pretty commanding presence on the battlefield. We wanted to extend that to this. These are going to be similar to some other effects we have in the game, you know, as shouts, you know, the tails we showed on Troubadour. They're going to be ally effects as you use them. And the special kind of hook into this is that they all have an echo. So when you use them, an initial effect is going to happen, and then kind of like your chance, after 3 seconds, an echo will happen. But you can speed up
Mano,
that
todas
echo
as
by using a
animações
burst
são
skill.
iguais, velho.
So you can use your normal burst skill or your chance, but when you activate that, it'll trigger the echo no matter how much duration had left on that interval. So with correct timing, you can really get it like right back to back, and potentially get a pretty powerful effect all at once. So starting with the heal, we have We Shall Return. First part of it, pretty simple, a lot like ally heals. You're going to heal yourself, heal allies around you, and then its echo effect is it's going to heal for a lesser amount, but also cleanse conditions. You know, pretty bread and butter what you want out of your handling slot as a support. And again, timing it correctly, making sure you have adrenaline before you use these commands can make it so that you get a lot of upfront value at once. We can move to the other utilities. The first one we have is Find Their Weakness. This one's going to be a more offensive command. It's going to strike and apply vulnerability to allies around you, and then after the echo triggers, you're going to get might based on how many enemies you struck.
Cara, eles literalmente
And,
usaram a mesma
you know,
animação.
pretty offensive
toda a
leaning, of course,
classe.
it's a lot
Foi
of
de-
vulnerability and might, so
Essa
it's a big
spec eles
swing in
fizeram em
damage.
2 dias.
And as well, it hits 5 targets, which can be pretty beneficial, especially on this spec. As we mentioned, adrenaline hungry. 5 hits is, 5 more ticks of adrenaline. So this can be a good builder for you. It's a low cooldown. Just a good button to be pressing to keep up, you know, the assault in PvE, PvP.
Concordo,
Keep your
Dres,
allies'
concordo.
damage up. Next, we can move on to Never Surrender. This one's going to be a more defensive command. You're going to break stun and grant yourself boons. And then there's a little additional effect that we're trying here. We'll try it in some other specs as we'll see next week. It's going to be a break stun that has a longer cooldown if you successfully use the break stun effect. This is kind of trying to play with the power level we can put on a stun break. So if you use a skill without breaking a stun, it'll have a lower cooldown. So kind of like knowing that you're not going to get the value from the stun break there, so you can use it a bit more and play with how you want to save your cooldowns in a fight. But we can move on to the echo effect for this. This is going to echo and give your allies the same boons. These are pretty important boons, so again, want to make sure that you're able to use that interval when you want it to happen. So can be a pretty interesting. This whole like stun break recharge increase is new, and definitely something we're gonna keep an eye on and feedback around. It's something, you know, pretty interesting. Never been done before. Could be good. People could not like it. Very open to feedback around it.
Gives you some additional decision making of like, there's less opportunity cost in using a skill like this without.
Mano, sério, é a mesma animação pra todas as habilidades. Que triste. Sério, podiam pelo menos ter feito uns gritos estilo Dragon Ball Z, alguma coisa, tá ligado? Pelo amor de Deus.
Go aggressive with that resistance, then that is much more of a realistic choice.
We can. Next command is going to be Brace Yourselves. This is kind of your basic defensive command. It's going to apply barrier and then more barrier on the echo. So this one is, as it says, when you want to brace yourself, you see a big hit coming. You know, your allies are already at full, but give them a barrier to make them even more tanky versus whatever hit's about to come in. Pretty good to keep your allies topped up with that
Paragon
barrier.
tá com as mesmas animações, mano.
You know,
É só aquela mesma animação de berro pra todas as habilidades, literal. E é classe suporte.
Lastly, we have On Your Knees. This one's also going to be an offensive
Perdeu
command.
o Tiff, Roger.
You're going to do the damage and cripple around when you use it. And again, it's going to hit 5 enemies. That's pretty good adrenaline gain. And then when it echoes, you're going to damage again, more adrenaline, and apply weakness to the enemies, making them do less damage to you, have less endurance in PvP.
Olha isso, mano. É literalmente a mesma animação para todas as habilidades.
The crippling here could be interesting, especially tactics as a trait line that Paragon is probably going to want to take. You know, get leg specialists, have an AoE immobilize.
Que preguiça de fazer animação nova,
so
mano.
this skill
Que
can be,
isso?
I think, deceptively good based on the minor effects and how you trait into changing what it does. But then we can get to the elite skill, and the elite skill is one we showed, or we talked about in the blog post, showed in the video, and everyone, you know, super cool effect. Having those Paragon wings, it's we will never yield. When you use it, you're going to get a buff on yourself where you cannot fall below 0, save, you know, some PvE boss effects. But basically, for the most part, you can't die, which is very strong. And then kind of like
Ó,
rebound is when this buff
temos uma
falls
animação
off,
nova.
you're going to get
Uma
barrier,
animação
and the
nova,
barrier is going to scale based on how low your health was.
eu acho.
Because denying death can be pretty powerful, but when damage is like constantly coming at you, you can live it at 1, and then if you don't get a little bolster
A
after that, you
lança
just fall over.
é a
So that
habilidade
barrier is there. It's a little
de
pillow
lança que já tem,
to make
Renan.
sure that you're able to heal your allies and everyone up when that effect ends. And so the echo here is going to be how you give your allies that buff. So I think out of all the commands, this one is the most important to have lined up with a chant or a burst skill to give your allies that buff. Because it's something that you really want to time well, because if you do it a bit late, you know, it's too late, they're dead. So trying to add a bit of skill expression here, just to add an extra caveat when you use a skill if you want to use it correctly. That kind of covers commands, how they play. So we can move on to the traits. First trait is going to be Rally the Valiant, just talking about motivation and the stuff we covered with the chants. The next minor trait is going to be Inspiring Implements. Gain motivation when you use your 4th and 5th weapon skills. It's kind of a new trigger that we're playing around with. Can kind of influence the weapons you want. Maybe some weapons have a longer cooldown on the 4 and the 5, and that matters to you. You really want that motivation building, so you choose to go an offhand that has maybe lower ones. I think, you know, Warhorn is a weapon that you can use the 4 and 5 slot decently freely, so a lot of motivation building built up. But just kind of the gist here is that it's a little extra motivation gain outside of your burst skills. Then we can move on to the Grandmaster Minor, which is Unyielding Resolve. Strike and condition damage dealt to you is reduced for each point of motivation you have. This is going to be a basic defensive trait, something, you know, a supportive character would want. You can't heal your allies if you're dead. So just kind of a passive defense to make sure you can stay on the battlefield, keep healing
Cara,
people.
essa spec do guerreiro, ela tá sem graça, mas ela tá usável, tá ligado? É uma spec viável, pelo que eu vejo.
First one's going to be Call to Action. This one's going to
Sem
trigger
graça total,
chant of
mas
action
viável.
when you get into combat. This will give you those motivation stacks and start the Might and Fury pulsing. It's pretty good to like kickstart how you play in a fight. When you first get into the fight with the spec, you'll want to build up adrenaline so you keep those chants. This one kind of just kind of accelerates that happening. Already gives you basically 10 free adrenaline. So in a longer, drawn-out encounter, this probably isn't giving you too much value, but I think in small skirmishes, or if you're in the open world constantly going from place to place, getting this free chant of action can be a lot of value at once and really just make it feel a bit smoother to play.
As you guys can see, it doesn't put the actual chant of action on cooldown, so you can get that initial activation, then even use chant of action again to get that extra motivation if you so choose.
Right. Then the next add-up trait, we're going to have Calming Ton. This one is just some small bonuses for a supportive trait. If, you know, chant of action or call to action doesn't appeal to you, this one just gives you a bit of additional concentration and healing power, so more boon duration, more healing, what you want to be doing as a support. Coming out of the adept here, just making sure that you always have a chant active to get the bonus from this. Then lastly, we have Liberating Liaise. It's going to grant you increased movement speed and then movement impairing conditions have reduced effectiveness on you. The movement speed is a thing that we see on a lot of traits. Warrior Sprint, kind of, this is an alternative to it if you don't want to be taking that trait. But the movement impairing conditions have reduced effectiveness is pretty new. Usually we just do reduced duration, but these are going to change how much you actually get slowed. So cripple will slow you for less, chill will slow you for less, which can be pretty impactful, especially in PvP scenarios. As a support, you don't want to get caught. You want to make sure you have good positioning, so this is going to help you out with that. Then we can move to the master tier. The first one we have is Brisk Pacing. Using a chant reduces the recharge of your other chants by a set amount.
Mas eu percebi que
incentivize you for swapping your
a impressão é que eles focaram bastante no suporte dessa vez.
Pulsing Mind and Fury want you to be swapping between the heal, between the swiftness, the stability, and if you're doing that off cooldown, you're going to get a lot of cooldown reduction for this. So if you have the adrenaline build up to support it, you can be really getting a lot of those, specifically the activated effects a lot. So a lot of power there behind that. Then we can move on to the middle one, which is Invigorating Tempo. This one's going to be a more sustained trait. Heal
A
yourself and
lança do
gain
vídeo é a
adrenaline for
skill
each
do
point of
Wire,
motivation
mano, que já
spent.
existe.
So again, as with that
Eles só
Grandmaster Miner we
combaram na
talked
hora de
about, you really
apresentar.
want survivability on a support spec so that, you know, you can keep supporting your allies and devote more of your cooldowns to them rather to yourself. And the adrenaline here is going to be a nice little refund. You know, cost adrenaline to get motivation, so getting some adrenaline back is kind of be like almost a burst mastery like effect to keep it so that you don't feel too starved of adrenaline in certain situations. Then lastly, we have Reverberation. This one's going to be the utility skill trait for the spec. Commands echo can trigger a second time. So going through all those echoes we talked about, the intervals, they have the potential with this trait to get them all twice, which, you know, elite, that's a pretty strong effect. But, you know, just making your heal better, getting more barrier, you get a lot of value out of this based on how many of those commands you have. The trigger for this will kind of work as you expect it to. It'll have like a same interval, so you use it, after 3 seconds, the echo effect will happen, then after another 3 seconds, another echo will happen, but you can speed both those up with the burst skills. You know, use a command, then you use your burst skill, it happens again, then you can use a burst skill right after to get that other echo. And get a drink, pour from the Grandmaster.
É uma spec full support. Eu nunca espero que seja super divertido, specs full support.
So the first Grandmaster is
Mas dá pra ver que eles pelo menos trabalharam bem ela, tá ligado? Só que as animações são bruxantes, tipo, é só grito. Eles podiam pelo menos ter feito umas animações de grito diferentes, sei lá. De resto, é uma spec bem feitinha, tipo, feijão com arroz, tá ligado?
Want to be seeing people do in PvE, and in competitive modes, this one's actually going to give quickness. You know, in World v World, compete with those Firebrands, those Chronomancers. That quickness is a powerful boon there, and give it a little edge in PvE to be in PvP to be a more offensive support. Something that Warrior is known for when you pick it is really making your allies, giving them a lot of might, making them hit harder. So this is kind of like carving out its niche there with this trait. We can go to the others. If we go to the middle one, we have Strengthening Stanzas. This one is going to be your more selfish trait. If you don't have allies running around the World v World, you want to play Paragon. This is kind of the trait you don't want to play Paragon with a group. This is the trait you want to take. You can see that you get a different bonus based on how many, or based on which chain you have activated. Chain of Action's going to give you pretty big damage modifier. Chain of Recuperation, pretty big incoming damage reduction. Chain of Freedom is a really large movement speed. So this has a lot of powerful effects behind it based on which one you're active. In competitive modes, you can also take this. Maybe you don't need additional support for your allies. You just need to be, have that really big damage, reduced damage incoming, or really high movement speed. So you can take this trait potentially and still be a pretty good support. So a lot of potential behind this one. And then lastly, we have Enduring Refrain. This one is going to make basically all your chants better as you activate them. This one's going to crank your support up to like the max level. It's going to cause Chain of Action to grant more might when you have the refrain going. Recuperation is going to heal more, and then Freedom is going to get increased.
O Tiff tá legal, mano. Eu curti o Tiff. Não vai ser uau, mas acho que vai ser uma das specs mais divertidas.
Recuperation cost 2, it's going to cost 1 now, and then Chant of
Não, a
Freedom.
gente tá indo pro terceiro já daqui a pouquinho.
This again making it so you can keep supporting your allies with even if you can't upkeep all of that adrenaline. So kind of seeing in all of those ways, different ways you can support your allies with the Paragon. That kind of, covers
Ritualista vai ser o próximo.
Cal's gonna hover over all the tooltips. Any words
on Paragon? Skills, or the traits, got a lot of good hover time, so I'm just gonna go quickly back through the skills. Yeah, I mean, Paragon is a lot of fun, like just having more things to spend your adrenaline on, even more so than like Spellbreaker at the F2. Now we have F2, F3, F4. Obviously, all the adrenaline traits are going to be very powerful.
Yes.
But it just gives you like that extra layer of decision making of like, when do I want to use my adrenaline? When do I need to build up more adrenaline so I can use multiple things back to back to back? And just going to add like a bit more depth to like typical warrior gameplay on top of being like that really strong support warrior that we've really been looking forward to adding to the game. Quickly through the commands here, and then we will transition back to a screen with just two of us on camera, so we can get set up for the final specialization today, which will be the Ritualist. brace yourselves. And finally, we will never yield. Fire that off one more time. Get some Paragon wings. And I hope you guys got all your screenshots. If not, check out the VOD after we wrap up here today. All right, getting set up for the Ritualist. Actually shouldn't take too long. But this one's, I mean, all of the specs that we've previewed so far have been pretty exciting. I'm even more excited to show off the Ritualist here today. Guild Wars 1 fans, you need to keep track of all of the Guild Wars references in the Guild Wars 2 version of the Ritualist. There are quite a few of them. I will call out a few of them here and there, but not every single one, because I would just never stop saying, oh look, a reference to a Guild Wars 1 skill. But yeah, let's talk about Ritualist. So we talked about this in the blog, the general mechanics around the spirits and how they work and how they're tied to Ritualist Shroud. The first thing we see here that when we equip the spec, we have access to F2, F3, F4. This is actually coming from the Grandmaster Minor trait. But these are what we're calling the Rupture skills. It's kind of a callback to a skill called Rupture Soul, which was destroy a spirit, and that one I believe just did damage around the spirit. But we're going to have 3 different flavors of these ruptures for each of the spirits. You will have Rupture Anguish, Rupture Wanderlust, and Rupture Preservation. These will obviously destroy that respective spirit and do some powerful effect around that area. So we see here Rupture Anguish, this is going to be your big damage one, give some offensive boons to nearby allies. As we mentioned in the blog, we're kind of expecting that a power DPS build will exist for the Ritualist, as well as a more healy support build. So offensive boons valuable in both those cases as well. Rupturing your Wanderlust, this is going to be more of that CC spirit that we'll see once we get into Shroud. This is going to do that AoE fear. There's not going to be any fear in the Shroud itself, but we will see that on the Rupture here. And finally, when you rupture the Spirit of Preservation, this is just going to give some really strong defensive boons, as you might expect from a powerful defensive spirit, giving Aegis resistance and stability to your nearby allies. So let's just hop into Shroud and start talking about how things kind of work in here. We're going to see, I'll just start off with Anguish. This is the one that we talked about. Whoop, that string has not been encrypted yet. But it is now. It's fine. No one saw that. But as we mentioned in the blog, Spirit of Anguish is kind of your bread and butter DPS skill, where you're going to spawn in Anguish. It's going to do a big attack. This is kind of similar to how Mesmer Phantasms work, where
oh yeah, Mesmer version.
Do a big attack. Also, you, the Ritualist, are going to be doing some relevant component to your skill as well. We see here with Anguish, this is just setting up, more of a setup thing. I'm going to be inflicting Cripple, Vuln, applying Painful Bond. That's going to be a skill that causes my summoned creatures, which includes spirits and minions. Those are both going to deal increased damage to this target. And then we see Anguish spawns, does its big attack.
Dá pra combar isso aí com os minions, né? Causa mais dano com os...
Does a barrage of projectiles.
Às vezes os minions são bananas.
Increased damage to crowd control foes, increased damage per condition on those target. You know, Spirit of Anguish in Guild Wars did increased damage to hexed foes, so we see kind of a nice nod to that on the big damage skill here, Spirit of Anguish. Notably, the spirits are not targetable. They're not really attackable or destroyable, but that is why they exist as long as you are in Shroud. We thought about this a lot as we were, building the Ritualist and thinking about, obviously in Guild Wars 1, spirits were more of that engineered turret type of gameplay, at least the offensive ones, where they would exist and be attackable and destroyable. So the counterplay was destroy the spirit. Tying it into Shroud, I guess I forgot to mention that we tied it into Shroud because this is kind of the more iconic thing that Ritualists do. We wanted to make sure that when you're playing Ritualist, you have access to these spirits, so tying them into Shroud also gave us that extra lever of, well, now the counterplay to these spirits is pressure the Ritualist out of Shroud. So these spirits are kind of sustained by your life force. As long as you are in Shroud, these spirits will exist. We see a little periodic auto attack coming out here that's going to do a little bit less damage than, say, the barrage, but as long as you're in Shroud, that's a little bit, range on that is a little weird. We'll fix that one for sure. Anguish didn't find something close enough to it to attack, but we'll see that mark here in just a second. The idea, again, just to summarize, Ritualist does a component of their skill, the spirit spawns, does its big attack, and then transitions into this more passive state as long as you are in Shroud. periodically doing a more basic attack on your enemies. So with all that said, now we can move back to the auto attack here, Essence Blast. This is pretty similar to like a core necro auto attack. It is going to do a little AoE explosion around the target, but it is going to get more powerful for each spirit that you have in the world. So we see kind of the weakest version here as we use that. Then we're going to spawn Anguish, spawn Wanderlust at a terrible location because we just want to increase our Essence Blast damage, and now we see just a bit more damage coming out from that Essence Blast. So nothing too crazy, you know, a basic ranged projectile skill to complement kind of this ranged,
Cara,
the ranged Anguish, you have the ranged
junta isso aí com os outros minions, vai ficar legal.
that made all these spirits get those powerful effects. One thing I did not mention about the ruptures initially is that these will automatically activate when the spirit expires. So if we just spawn Anguish, we didn't really find a great opportunity to use the rupture that we wanted to. When we're exiting Shroud, that spirit's going to explode. That's going to trigger the rupture Anguish, and if I wasn't cheating, you would see that skill actually go on cooldown. Except I pressed it manually. Great demonstration here by CMC. Let's take a look at this one. There we see Rupture Wanderlust going on recharge without being pressed because it is going to just trigger automatically when the spirit expires. So next up, let's actually take a look at what Wanderlust does. Some people may remember the spirit name from Guild Wars as well. A spirit that knocked down enemies, I believe, if they were moving. Not a great mechanic that translates too well into our game. So Wanderlust just going to come in, it's going to knock enemies down, and then create kind of this pulsing area that's going to inflict a few different unique conditions, do a bit of damage as well. And we saw the initial Ritualist side of this attack is more of that Ritualist lightning that, you know, was definitely seen on a few of those more offensive skills from Guild Wars. And that's going to do a nice little AoE damage and some days.
O F2, F3, F4 só dá pra usar no Shroud também.
While the spirit is still active, it's going to destroy that spirit, triggering the rupture skill, and then spawn a new spirit at the new location. That's obviously a lot more important when I'm cheating, but we will actually see some fun traits in the future that may run into this mechanic. Get a closer up on some of these spirit attacks. We saw Rupture Anguish triggering as well. Wanderlust getting this nice little pulsing area. And the last spirit we have here, the Spirit of Preservation. Periodically healed in Guild Wars 1. Here we're going to have the Ritualist side of this giving AoE protection and vigor. And then Spirit of Preservation will pop
Eu
in.
ativo 4 e ele ativa o F4.
Let's heal some allies that actually have damage taken. Notably, we did make kind of an exception to the typical Death Shroud rules for the Ritualists themselves, whereas this is mostly a normal Shroud where the damage is taken against the life force pool and you can't be healed, but there are a few exceptions where we are allowing the Ritualists to heal themselves. We'll see here with Preservation, that's going to be a heal that goes through that, but other people still won't be able to heal you. It felt, you know, a little weird that you would have a skill in a Shroud that said heal yourself and nearby allies and it just wouldn't do anything. So we're trying that out, seeing if that doesn't break things too horribly, and you will be able to have that kind of self-sustain here in Shroud. Notably, the Spirit of Preservation's basic attack will do a small amount of healing as well to nearby allies, in addition to doing a bit less damage than the other two. One thing I didn't mention about the auto attack Essence Blast is that this will kind of mark an enemy for your spirits to prioritize. So if the spirits find an enemy nearby that has this mark, their basic attacks will be focused on that target. If not, then they're just going to be looking at some nearby enemy to attack. But if you want to focus these attacks on a particular enemy, just
Nem eu lembro de pedir pra dar like.
Nothing too crazy. And last up, we have Summon Spirits. This one's going to be more of that utility-focused mobility skill. We're just going to see here that it's a ground target shadow step, so good with like Z-axis situations. But the fun part here is that your spirits will all come with you. And if they aren't currently doing something, that will also trigger a basic attack. So you do have an opportunity to get like an extra burst of damage as maybe your spirits do their auto attack, then you teleport in with Summon Spirits as well, and they will then auto attack again for a little bit of extra damage or a little bit of extra heal. So that's kind of how the spirits work and how the shroud works and all the ruptures and all the stuff around that. So I'm going to take a quick water break before we hop into the utility skills, which are weapon spells, another thing that some people might recognize.
Ah, sei lá, o Necro tá
You know, I think
legalzinho.
to me, the interesting part about Ritualist Shroud is that it is pretty similar to core Necromancer Shroud. I think, you know, as we've gone through the elite specializations, Reaper was heavily melee focused, Scourge didn't have a Shroud exactly, and then Harbinger doesn't have that health effect that normal Necromancer Shrouds have. So something that's pretty similar to what Necromancers played for with a while is what really interests me the most about Ritualist spec, and how we can, you know, have another ranged shroud that also replaces your health pool and back to that kind of core Necromancer gameplay.
Yeah, for sure. And like, you know, range support is just going to be a little bit more useful than melee support. So weapon spells, we talked about this. Let's just hover one of these while we ramble a little bit. We talked about this a little bit in the blog as well, where this is obviously another mechanic that existed in Guild Wars 1, but the way that these skills worked in Guild Wars 1 is that they were ally targeted skills. You would affect a single ally, grant them this effect, and, you know, they were all pretty powerful, but we've kind of seen the difficulties around ally targeted skills
Essa aí por
so
enquanto
far
tá
in Guild Wars
ok,
2.
tipo.
So we're going to have a little bit
Nada,
different
nada que eu
implementation
achei,
here,
tipo, super
where
foda pra
these are
caralho,
going
mas
to
tá
give
boa,
an
tipo.
AoE effect around you. All your allies are going to get the weapon spell effect, while the ritualists themselves will get a full power effect. So we see here with Resilient Weapon, this is going to be a damage reduction. It's going to be a pulse heal. Might look, you know, might sound a little bit familiar, even though it works slightly differently. But
dos três até agora, acho que o Tiff vai ser o mais divertido de
damage
jogar.
reduction, increase below 50% health, and you're going to get 6 seconds of this as the, let me just make sure I'm not going to die. As the ritualist, you will be giving yourself 6 seconds of this, and then we'll be giving 3 seconds of this to allies. So they're going to get a little bit less duration of that damage reduction, a little bit less healing overall, but then it's going to be more easily usable, and like you're going to be able to give this to all your allies as opposed to having to work with that more difficult ally targeting mechanic. And we're going to see a couple different flavors of these, as with the Guild Wars 1 weapon spells. Some are going to feel a little bit more like stances, with the duration based, whereas some are going to feel a little bit more like venoms. Maybe one called Splinter Weapon. It had to be here. Is anyone surprised that Splinter Weapon is basically the same skill as it was in Guild Wars 1, because that effect translates really well into Guild Wars 2, where you are going to have this additional AoE strike around enemies that you strike. You're going to give some of this to enemies. You're going to give this something to your allies. So everyone can have the Splinter Weapon at the same time, and that's potentially a lot of extra splash damage hits. Maybe you can give it to a ranger and they can cast Barrage, and it will behave slightly differently than Guild Wars 1 Barrage, but you can, in
Vocês
fact,
acham que vai ter
Splinter
drops
Barrage
no beta?
in
Eu
Guild
tô achando
Wars
que eles
2 as
vão
soon as
liberar uns
Ritualist
dropzinhos no
is
beta pra
available
incentivar o
in
pessoal
beta.
a testar as classes.
So notably here, you give yourself 5 stacks of Splinter Weapon. Allies get 3 stacks of Splinter Weapon. Slight reduction. You know, maybe you have minions. You can give your minions Splinter Weapon. That's a little bit scary, but we will see a couple of nods to minions. You know, vaguely, we're going to do things that affect creatures. We saw that with Painful Bond. We have some that care about a spirit or a minion, because, you know, that is another thing that it's not only because it's a Guild Wars callback. You know, we have a lot of elite specs that don't really care about minions. So as we're building out the Ritualist, we knew that there's a lot of associations already. Obviously, the spawning power attribute in Guild Wars 1 made your minions more powerful, and there were other things that cared about summon creatures in Guild Wars 1. We'll see that a lot more in the traits as well. So there is kind of that opportunity to play with some minions, play with Splinter Weapon, give your minions Splinter Weapon, and that is potentially really fun, potentially a lot of damage, and you know, we do want to lean into that opportunity for minions to be a more viable playstyle with Ritualist, especially.
Pô, finalmente. Uma
So we saw
spec
Splinter
que
Weapon.
vai.
Next, we'll see Nightmare Weapon.
Que vai.
Another one that translates pretty
Dá pra
well.
usar
This is going to be
minions.
more of that defensive. You have some lifesteal, but the big thing here is going to be a pretty meaty heal. Allies are obviously going to get a lower duration of this, but you will just get some extra lifestealing off of your strikes. Maybe I should take some damage so I can actually get some value out of my lifesteal. But here we see That's obviously triggering off Life Siphon as well, getting even more healing, but this is a nice little self-survivability tool. Obviously, you can give it to your allies as well. They're going to get a little bit of healing there, and you're also going to stack up a bunch of vulnerability on your enemy. Next up, we'll take a look at the Weapon of Remedy. This is going to be more of that condition removal type of effect. This is going to be another one of those duration-based buffs, where every second you're going to remove a condition from yourself or from the allies that are affected by this, and every time that you do remove a condition, it will give you a little bit of healing. So a nice little, pretty low duration, that nice little cleanse over time with a little extra on top with that nice little heal. Last up, we have Weapon of Warding. This is another one that is, a pretty iconic weapon spell. So we wanted to find a way to translate into Guild Wars 2 and, blocking an attack 50% of the time, maybe not the best mechanic for this game, so we're not doing anything like that. This is just going to be a stack-based block similar to like the Arcane Shields or the Shield of Wraths of the Guild Wars 2 universe. We're going to see you're going to get 3 block stacks. Allies are going to get a single stack of that blocking buff. And, there's a little bit of regen in there, grant a little bit less regen to your allies. When this expires, that's also going to be giving protection. So whether that expires on timeout or because your ally blocked or you blocked, giving that protection at the end because, you don't really need it when you're blocking attacks most of the time. And last up, we have kind of an exciting mechanic. Exciting new mechanic that is, again, kind of inspired by Guild Wars 1 pretty heavily. There's going to be Zinray's weapon or Zinrai's weapon. I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm sure chat knows whether it's Zinray's or Zinrai's. I always say Zinray. But the idea here is that this is going to give you stacks of a buff. Allies will get a single stack. You will get 2 stacks of this buff. And this buff says that when you take damage over a percentage of your maximum health, it is going to heal for the difference. This is slightly different than how the mechanic worked in Guild Wars. We saw this on stuff like Protective Spirit, Protective Bond, obviously Zinrai's weapon. It is a pretty interesting defensive tool. We wanted to try it out. It's a little scary as well. So it is on the elite skill here, and there are... I mentioned the implementation here is a little bit different so that there are kind of additional holes in here. This is not going to just set that incoming damage to 5% because this way, if you take a lethal strike, you will actually die. This won't prevent you from getting, killed by a boss attack that says you die instantly, or it does just so much damage that you are going to die from this strike. But if you survive the strike and it did more than 5% of your max health, it is going to heal you for the difference, and then you're also going to do a little bit of lifesteal to that enemy. Pretty fun idea. Pretty powerful defensive tool. Is also going to break stun for allies and give them just a single stack of stability. We saw the big stability over here on Rupture Preservation, but a nice little bonus stack of stability to your allies. And you can obviously give them the Zinray's weapon as well, so they can have a single defensive mechanic.
Uma bolinha voando em
Very
volta.
good against things like kill shot, not as much against things like rapid fire.
Eu não tô vendo as... Cara, não tô vendo as animações aqui.
Quick water break set up for our final burst through the traits.
Pra quem se inscreveu aí no canal, valeu. Agradeço. Eu não tô vendo aqui quem tá se inscrevendo porque tá bugado.
Now just calling out, there's a lot of, weapon spells have a lot of different uses. There's a lot of defensive ones and the offensive ones are pretty different from each other, so it's going to be interesting seeing how this
É mix de target com action, maninho.
Has some pretty niche but really powerful supportive effects, I'd say. So seeing how it fills out when you want to play a support ritualist or even like a DPS ritualist that takes a couple of these, should be interesting to see what people come up with.
Bone Minion Splinter Weapon. Alright, moving into the traits. Let's put on some random traits. This UI doesn't keep flashing one last time today. Kicking things off with the minor trait that explains the pressure mechanic. Spawning power, obviously a callback to the primary attribute of the ritualist. A nice little nod here on a trait that doesn't actually do anything other than tell you how all of these things work.
Todas, né, mano? Todas ele sumou numa bolinha em volta e deu.
Boon of Creation. This is going to be a little bit more of that life force generating type of trait.
Todas
Every
foram
time
só
you
uma
summon a
bolinha
creature,
summonando em volta.
so a spirit or a minion,
A
you're gonna get
preguiça
some life
deles pra
force.
fazer
So
animação é
notably,
impressionante.
you can use this outside of Shroud with minions in order to build up life force towards Shroud. When you're already in Shroud, you're going to be getting some life force back every time that you summon a spirit, so just giving you a little bit more uptime on those spirits as well, and just giving you that additional life force. Nice little, effectively a defensive minor trait here. Next up, as mentioned, Ruptured Souls. This is going to be the thing that's actually giving you access to the Rupture skills. We wanted these to be pretty powerful. You know, we saw a lot of damage, a lot of might, fury, obviously the huge boons here on Rupture Preservation. But we wanted to make these skills strong enough that we felt it is essentially the trait level strength of those effects, as opposed to making them significantly worse and then putting a different effect here in the Grandmaster slot. Moving into the adept traits, the first one here is kind of a fun one, Wandering Spirits. This is going to cause your spirits to basically follow you around. So it's going to play around with Spawn and Anguish. And the idea is that every time Anguish goes to auto attack or any of the other spirits go to auto attack, they're going to first move closer to your position. So not as relevant if you're fighting a stationary boss, but maybe you're running around the open world and you're going to want your spirits to be following you around as you're moving. Hopefully be near enemies still, such that your spirits will be attacking things, but this is giving you that opportunity to not have them locked to a single position when summoned. Next up, we'll take a look at Spirit's Gift. Add another one to your tally of Guild Wars 1 references, but this is another thing that makes a lot of sense. Every time you summon a creature, spirit, or minion, you will heal and remove conditions from nearby allies. We wanted to make this one trigger around yourself because if you are, throwing a Wanderlust, for example, out at an enemy to knock them down, we still wanted to give you that healing to you and your allies at your location. So this one does behave slightly differently in that it triggers around yourself. But this is another case where we kind of made an exception. Spirit's Gift will allow you to heal yourself when you are in Shroud, because a lot of the creatures that you are summoning are going to be in Shroud, whether or not you have minions. Next up, we have Explosive Growth, kind of the collection of Ritualist enchantment spells, because really what are traits other than enchantments that never expire? But Explosive Growth, every time you summon a creature, deal damage to enemies around that creature. So again, I'm going to run in, spawn my bone minions. That's going to do a couple of procs of Explosive Growth. You go into Shroud, summon some spirits. This one's going to be triggering around the enemies, because again, I'm going to spawn Wanderlust.
Otávio, eles estão brincando com o nosso coração.
To happen around them. So both of these traits kind of work the way that you would want them to, but a nice little potentially bursty damage trait here.
Mantenha as expectativas lá embaixo, que daí a ansiedade diminui. Mano, e a gente não vai ter tudo no primeiro dia, né, mano? Tu não esquece disso.
Obviously from yourself and from allies. Similar mechanic where allies get a slightly lower effectiveness here. You're going to cleanse 2 from yourself, remove 1 from allies. And that's just how it's going to be, a powerful defensive option if you have a bunch of weapon spells on your bar. Here in the middle, we have Empowering Spirits. This is going to be that boon trait. I'm going to give some quickness as in addition to other boons here when you summon a spirit. So every time you summon Anguish, you're going to give might and quickness to nearby allies. Then you're going to summon Wanderlust, give quickness and fury to nearby allies. And similarly, with the Spirit of Preservation, you will give resolution and quickness to nearby allies. So, pretty straightforward boon DPS trait. You're going to be going in this Shroud, summoning your spirits, giving some boons, and that's going to be quite useful. And last up, we have Spirit's Strength. Spirits deal more damage and their healing is increased. This one's pretty straightforward. Kind of plays into the more aggressive spirit builds where you're going to be summoning Anguish, Wanderlust. I mean, even Preservation does some damage, but this is going to affect both the initial attack here from Anguish as well as any follow-up auto attacks. Same idea with Wanderlust, where the initial damage coming from this pulsing field will be increased as well. and then also the auto attack, and finally preservation is going to do additional healing in addition to additional damage on its
Talvez
auto
eu
attack,
jogue
and
por
its
causa dos minions e
and
tal,
that
mas não
healing
sei.
burst that
Tem
happens
que ver
will
na
also
prática
be
como é que vai
increased
ficar.
by this trait. So this is just, you know, leaning as heavily as you want into the spirit strength. They're significantly stronger.
Todos os espíritos atacam junto ao mesmo tempo, da mesma forma.
3 more traits to go. Kicking things off with Wielder's Boon. This is kind of an additional weapon spell trait where now all your allies are going to get the full effect of this. So this is, I mean, it's good with all of them. This is also going to work with Wielder's Remedy. Whether or not it does right now, I have to double check because that was kind of a late adjustment, but it will give you the full effectiveness of Wielder's Remedy as well, so 2 Connie removals. But now you can give your allies 5 stacks of Splinter Weapon. You can give them full duration of Resilient Weapon. You know, basically, if you are looking to get those powerful moments of the weapon spells, now you can get even more of that to your allies. And then the next trait is going to be Lingering Spirits. So this is something that we kind of alluded to in the blog post, where there is a way to get your spirits to persist outside of Shroud, and that is if you have the Lingering Spirits Grandmaster trait. So the way that this works is that anytime you exit Shroud and you still have life force remaining, let's just go in, let's spawn some spirits. I'm going to leave immediately with full pool of life force. These spirits are going to continue to exist, and also the life force drain from Shroud is continuing to exist here. Notably, this makes the spirits attack a little bit faster as well, so you get a little bit of haste quickness of their attack interval. So, you know, if you're trying to maximize your damage from your spirits, you'll probably take like Lingering Spirits, Spirit Strength. That's going to be like the most sustained damage. And, you know, maybe you even have Wandering Spirits on because you're running around the open world, and now you're having this, you know, Spirit Army kind of following you around, attacking nearby enemies. And that will last as long as you have spirits active, or as long as you have the life force. It will kind of snapshot your life force pool when you exit, so you can't
Eu
continue
achei
to build up life force on
o
top of that. We'll see this here.
Necro e o Wire em feijão com arroz. O Tiff é o mais divertidozinho dos 3, pra ser sincero. E até o mais bem feitinho, com mais detalhes e tal, cada skill praticamente tem uma animação diferente. O Wire não tem animação nenhuma, é só grito. E o Necromancy, porra, é legal os minionzinhos ali, mas podiam ter trabalhado mais, sabe? Tipo, cada minion podia ter um ataque diferente, tipo, de um auto-ataque diferente, e podiam ser diferentes pelo menos. Tipo, mas enfim.
And last but not least, we have, you know, one last Guild Wars callback to
Sim, também achei, guarda. Eu achei que, tipo, eles não são... Eles são torres, na verdade, né? Eles funcionam como torres. E aí, maninho, seja bem-vindo.
If you could recharge all of your spirit skills instantly, but the first spirit skill that you use when entering Ritualist Shroud will recharge immediately. So we can see here,
ah, mas os minions do Elementalista andam junto, mano. Esses espíritos aí não tem perna, flutuam e ainda ficam parados. Mas não tinha, só tem um espírito em Oden inteiro, não tinha mais um diferentezinho, não. Eu pergunto porque eu não sei, nunca reparei.
You know, preservation, pretty good option because that's going to be triggering erupts for preservation, giving that stab resistance Aegis, and you know, if you have enough life force, maybe it'll be still around the next time this skill becomes available. So some pretty powerful stuff that you can
Mas Israel, não tem... Essa DLC tá entregando o que a gente já esperava de mini expansão, mano. Eu não sei, não tem... É isso é o nível de qualidade deles hoje. Eu não tô esperando nada além disso. Tipo, eu não tô esperando nada nível POF Hot, mano.
It's not going to be exactly the same, but it is heavily inspired by. I think we're pretty excited about it. Love to get players' hands on it. Let us know what you like. Let us know what you don't like.
9 spec numa mini expansão, tipo, por mais que elas sejam meia boca, ainda são 9 spec, cara.
Of all the skills here, and then we're going to wrap up the stream for today. Any thoughts, Taylor, on the
Yeah,
Ritualist?
I think just another disclaimer that the numbers you guys see as we hover everything are still in flux. We're actively tweaking them. A lot of like the initial things we put are very much vibe based. Before the beta, gonna go back through and make sure things are closer to how we want them. Obviously, use the beta for fine tuning things. So some numbers might seem pretty crazy. Maybe they're not crazy. But just keep that in mind as you're looking at the value for things. But largely, the functionality of the tooltips should be correct.
Bone minions? That's not a ritualist skill. Maybe it will be for a number of the people in the chat. I love playing Minion Necro because all the minions get the Arena Guild tag when they follow you around, so maybe Ritualist is the Necro spec for me.
Yep.
Open of Warding, Sinray's weapon, and I guess we should show off the Shroud skills one last time. Essence Blast, of course granting me might because I have the Spite trait line equipped. Spirit of Anguish.
Mm-hmm.
Spirit of Wanderlust is not a leap finisher. Don't believe the skill fact here. Spirit of Preservation.
Ah, eles acabaram,
last
só
but
tô
not least.
enrolando. Seguinte, ó. O Tiff eu achei legal, tipo, ele tá divertido pelo menos. Eu achei mais bem trabalhado que todos os outros. Pelo menos tem várias animações novas e diferentes, tá? Com certeza foi o das três a mais bem trabalhada. O Wire é um feijão com arroz suporte. A única coisa que eu achei tosca nele é as animações, que é basicamente só grito. Eles usaram a mesma animação de grito para todas as habilidades. Tirando a Elite Spec lá, com a asinha. Eu achei assim... Sério, mas tudo bem. O gameplay dela vai ser feijão com arroz. E o Necro também não tá nada muito fora, tá ligado? Tipo, o Necromancer também tá feijão arroz nível Harbinger, na minha opinião. Eu não sei, não sei o que vocês estão esperando. Pra mim, esse Necro aí tá no nível de qualidade do Harbinger, tipo, EOD. Então, assim, nada uau, mas nada também tão escroto. Eu acho só que eles estão pecando muito, na minha opinião, na questão da qualidade de animações. Tipo, eles reaproveitam demais, mano. Eles reaproveitam demais. Eu sempre tive esse problema com as spec e eles continuam tendo esse mesmo problema. Eles sempre fazem, né, Israel? Eles estão fazendo isso já há muito tempo, há muitos anos. E assim, isso faz perder um pouquinho aquela qualidade nos detalhes pequenininhos, tá ligado? Só isso, tipo... Acho que eles podiam trabalhar um pouquinho mais esses detalhes pra ficar um pouquinho mais legal. Só isso. Por exemplo, o guerreiro ali, mano. Pô, custava ter feito mais umas 3 animações diferentes de grito, mano. Já até aproveitava isso aí como emote dentro do jogo. Tipo, a mesma animação de grito, mano. Pra todas as habilidades, sério. Calma, Wild. Faltam 3 ainda. Pra bater o martelo. Mas é isso, tipo, eu só. Por isso que das três hoje, pra mim o Tiff foi o mais bem trabalhado. Se vocês repararem, o Tiff é o que mais teve animação diferente. O engenheiro elementalista tem o Revenant também, né, mano? O Revenant, normalmente, eles trabalham bem as animações do Revenant. Se vocês forem parar pra analisar, assim, o Revenant normalmente, né? Vamos dizer que nunca, não dá pra dizer que sempre, mas normalmente as animações do Revenant são as mais legaisinhas do jogo. Mel. Mel. Ah, cara, assim, ó, eu só vou tirar minhas conclusões finais no beta. Tipo, as animações é uma coisa que eu sempre achei que a ArenaNet peca, mas isso não estraga completamente o gameplay, pelo menos. Israel tá. Cara, tu tá muito indignado. Cara, tem que ter um equilíbrio, mano. Não adianta vocês quererem uma expansão absurda, sendo que a gente tá no modelo de mini expansão também. Tem que ter o equilíbrio. Tu tá com burnout, Israel, dá um tempo. Dá uma jogada no Final Fantasy, vai jogar um LoL. Daqui a pouco tu volta, mano. Tipo, tu tá cansado do game, mano. Não importa o que eles forem fazer, tu não vai gostar. Pera aí. Não, mas é que assim, ó, eu falo isso porque não é zoeira, mano. Eu já tive nesse estado. Tipo, eu já tive nessa vibe de quando o cara tá cansado do game, tá enjoado, a, a empresa pode fazer o que quiser, mano, que tu não vai curtir. Entendeu? E eu sei por experiência própria, mano. Eu já tive tanto no Guild Wars quanto em outros jogos, mano. Chega um ponto que não importa o que a empresa faça, tu vai achar uma bosta. É assim que é. O LoL foi só um exemplo, mano. Para, o LoL é o MOBA mais jogado. É, uns dias a gente vê as outras três. É, o Ranger até agora, na minha opinião, tá mais legal, mas é que eu também tenho que considerar que é a minha classe favorita no jogo, né? Então, sei lá. Cara, o Wire vai ser legal pra quando o cara quer jogar full suporte. Tenho certeza. Vai ser uma spec massa pra jogar suporte. Eles estão focando muito nisso em specs full suporte. Tu nem gostou, né, Wild, mas vai usar 8 de 9. Imagina se gostasse. É que, velho, na prática pode, quando a gente for jogar no beta, vai ter, a sensação vai ser, de fato, assim, olhando assim fica sem graça, mano, essa é a verdade. É, mano, é o que eu falo, nova spec de uma vez só é muita coisa pra ele, sempre foi. Sempre foi. Jogando script pra tudo que é lado. Ia ser legal se eles tivessem substituído os script pelos Azura, mano. Acho que ia ficar mais legal. Acho que ia ficar bem mais épico. Mas enfim, fica a ideia aí no ar. Ai, ai. Tá, qual que foi o vencedor da rodada pra vocês? Qual que vocês acharam que foi o mais top dos três? Pra mim foi o Tiff. Pra mim, dos três aí, o que mais me agradou foi o Tiff. Eu pensei que o Necromancer ia ganhar fácil, mas eu não fiquei empolgado olhando o gameplay do Necromancer. Ficou no Necro. O Necro eu não sei, mano. Cara, eu vou falar pra vocês. Essas apresentações deles são muito chatas, velho. Puta que pariu. Eu acho muito sem graça. É muito técnico, tá ligado? Sabe o que eu ia achar mais interessante? Se eles fizessem um vídeo de gameplay de 5 minutos jogando. Eu ia achar mais divertido de olhar. Faz um vídeo de gameplay de 5 minutos jogando com a classe. Eu ia achar mais divertido que essas apresentações dele, na boa. Bom. Bueno, se desse a gente ia pro Guild Wars, mas... Amanhã tem mais e hoje é sexta, é isso aí, mano. Quarta-feira a gente vê as últimas 13 e vamos ver o que que dá, né? Terça-feira vai ter o próximo clima de velório. Terça-feira tem um evento. Acho que o beta, o Rush também vai começar, né? Na terça, pelo que eu entendi. Vai ter beta do PVP de novo. Vamos jogar umas partidinhas também. E, e quarta-feira tem as últimas 3, né? Vamos ver o que que vai dar. Amanhã de manhã. Amanhã de manhã tem live de Warframe pra nós dar uma variada. Pra quem tiver afim de olhar. Pra dar uma variada do Guild Wars. Esquecer um pouco dos problemas. E é isso, galera. Boa sexta-feira aí pra vocês. Valeu pela presença aí. Valeu por ter visto comigo aí a apresentação maravilhosa da ArenaNet. Super empolgante. O que que deu de bom, mano? Tiff foi a melhor. O Wire berra. E o Necromancy é ok. A pistola. Ó, o Wild já tá pensando nos lucros já. O Wild já tá pensando nos lucros. Tiff foi a melhor pra mim, mano. Sério. É questão de gosto, mano. Questão de gosto. Aí vai ser questão de gosto. Aí eu achei o Tiff mais bem trabalhado dos três. Mas é isso aí, galera. Eu vou nessa, tá? Tem que encerrar aqui, vou voltar pro serviço. A gente se vê amanhã de manhã aí às 8 horas com Warframe. Boa sexta-feira aí pra vocês. Não, vai ser divertido, mano, certeza. O Tiff vai ser o mais divertido, sério. Vocês vão ver. O Tiff vai ser o mais top. Valeu, galera. Até amanhã de manhã. Falou.